Property rights are under attack in Canada. Legal firearm owners are the canary in the coal mine. So if you think that this won't affect you, think again. Rod Giltaca, thank you so much for joining me. Rod is, of course, from the CCFR and an advocate for firearms owners in Canada, but also this has become a property rights issue in this country. Can you tell us what's happened recently and why we should be concerned about this?
So we launched a massive lawsuit against the federal government regarding the assault-style weapons ban that also included a bunch of bolt-action rifles and some 22s and some shotguns and everything else, assault-style weapons, I guess. But we launched this massive lawsuit against the government to determine whether or not Canadians had property rights. And the idea, I guess, behind that lawsuit is, can the government just for whatever reason, whether it's political or public safety even, right? Can the government just reach into your life, prohibit something that you own, and take it from you, and not have to justify anything? Because the ban itself, they didn't offer any justification other than something called a regulatory impact analysis statement, a RIAS it's called. And basically, it had a bunch of political language there, like, oh, these firearms are too dangerous to own, and thus we must confiscate them. So the idea was, as I said, can the government just reach into your life whenever it wants and just take something that you legally bought and legally own, and you haven't done anything to deserve it? So we ended up with a verdict after over 3.5 years, and it turns out, yeah, the courts agree. The government can just reach into your life and grab whatever it wants. And it also determined that the government, and this is almost a direct quote, the rulings out there on the interwebs, you can check that out, but the government owes you no procedural fairness in these kinds of matters. So running to the courts, to protect you from the government, I'm not sure that that's a thing anymore.
So this is terrifying because this isn't a case where they passed legislation. They didn't go through our representatives, put forward a bill, discuss this, debate it in the House of Commons, in the Senate. This was directly, what was it, from the PMO? How did this work?
Well, the government uses an instrument called an order in council, and what that is, it's I guess the American equivalent would be an executive order. So it's the Governor General. The Governor General goes in and they write something up, and it just becomes law de facto. And orders in council are usually used for things like government appointments or to make tweaks to legislation. So maybe there was a regulation like body armor. There was laws passed provincially about body armor. But then afterwards, after they made body armor prohibited, or you needed a special license for it, and this certainly happened in BC, you went and looked under regulations, and basically in the legislation it says, here's all the conditions, or as determined by regulations. And then the BC government put in a regulation that said, if you have a firearms license, you can possess body armor. So it's for these little tweaks that allow you to keep a law updated or change some relevant things like that. It's not meant to do sweeping things like ban $1 billion worth of private property and then confiscate it from people all over the country, hundreds of thousands of Canadians, right? So it was an improper use of that. And our case basically said the government did not have the administrative authority to do it. And the court said, yeah, they can absolutely do it, and we owe you no procedural fairness.
Well, and it seems very arbitrary. So the idea of an assault weapon, this is a new term that people are throwing around, assault weapon. I mean, weapons are made to, you're assaulting a deer with a rifle if you're out hunting, but largely when you look at what they had in mind, it was anything that looked ergonomic, looked scary, I suppose. And this was what they were putting it towards. Now, the big fear here is that, well, there are other items out there that people think are bad and scary. Say, for example, automobiles. They're talking about this right now, even in British Columbia. There's Bill 39, the Zero Emissions Act, where they're talking about banning gasoline and diesel cars. Now, that's big, bad, and scary if you're a climate alarmist. Is this something they could push forward? Is this a precedent we should be worried about, where they could just come in and ban any sort of item based on these arbitrary rules?
Well, the elitists in Canada seem to have known the whole time, or they gleefully declare that you have no property rights in Canada. And it's kind of an interesting dynamic here because, I was born here in Vancouver, British Columbia. And Canada's always been sold to us as a free country, right? I mean, free country, you can own your home, you can own your property, and you have certain rights. You have this charter, apparently.
Apparently.
I think the last maybe 3 years, we've all understood that the charter is worthless. It's just a piece of paper. But the interesting thing is, I spent my whole life thinking that Canada was one of the best free countries out there. But the reality is that we never really had codified rights. Let's say like the Americans do. We don't have an amendment, a list of amendments that are there in a constitution that can't be infringed, period. We have some loose documents and then some more ancient documents like the Bill of Rights or whatever. And people have had a really hard time proving those out in courts, and courts tend to take the side of the government all the time. And you never really had to know that you had no rights to begin with until a government is so malevolent that they come and they actually exercise that power over you. So back when I was younger, we would never think that the government would just come and grab stuff, because no government would ever have the guts to do that. No government would be so bold. Well, now, and this is why you need codified rights, because now we have such a government and they are doing these things. And then we go to the court to say, help us. We're free, aren't we? And the court's like, nah, I'm siding with the government. We had 5 or 7 charter questions in our case. And basically the judge said, here's what you said. Here's what the government said. I agree with the government. Next one. Here's what you said. And she agreed with the government, every single one of them. And I think this should be a hard lesson for all Canadians, that at least do you have property rights in Canada? You do not have it. Do you have rights to own firearms and any kinds of firearms at all? No, you don't have any of those rights. Do you have a right to administrative fairness? No, you don't have that either. So it's a bit of a wake-up call.
Yeah, well, and for a lot of people that might think that that's hyperbolic, here is a clip from David Lametti himself. He was the former justice minister. He's no longer in that position due to political reasons, but this is what he had to say.
You don't have an absolute right to own private property in Canada. There are steps that are taken when expropriations happen at whatever level of government, and we'll be sure to stay with.
Well, look. And be sure to stay within the boundaries of the law is where he's getting at here. And that's what's scary for a lot of people, even not non-firearm owners. People who just want to be able to own a house. There's a housing crisis right now. Is that going to become a big thing? There's, the climate crisis. Are we going to be able to maintain our automobiles? Or even in the case like in British Columbia, where electric cars are more and more popular in the free market, and that's fine if people want to buy them, but have them forced on you and have your gasoline cars maybe even confiscated from you, or buyback schemes. This kind of thing is a giant worry. So what is the CCFR doing now, moving forward, to bring this fight to bring us back our property rights?
Well, it's not over. We believe we have a very good legal team, and our legal team believes that the judge made an error in law and on at least 3 of her rulings, and she didn't. Usually, a decision like this would be hundreds of pages, and this decision wasn't. It's very, very slim, and no real legal basis was detailed in her ruling, which usually you find that in rulings like this. So it's oddly absent. So anyway, we have made the decision to file an appeal with the Federal Court of Appeal. So we'll see. That process should take about probably a year. There may not be a Liberal government in place in a year. Maybe the Conservatives show up and Pierre Poilievre actually fulfills his promise about wanting to make Canada the freest country on earth, or whatever that campaign promise is, or the tagline, and deal with a lot of these issues, and maybe even codify some things in legislation. We don't know, but we're going to appeal it, and hopefully we get a better ruling from the appeals court. And you never know, it might get kicked up to the Supreme Court of Canada. But again, at the end of the day, these are questions that all Canadians should be interested in the answers to, because it'll fundamentally determine what kind of country you think you're living in. And then if the answer is we have none of these rights, then the situation is a lot different than I think most of us that grew up here know, right? It's very different.
Well, a big fear of mine is that, even if we get rid of the radical Trudeau government, there's a lot of appointed judges that have these ideals that his cabinet hold dear to themselves. Now, you can follow the CCFR on, of course, all your favorite social medias. Rod, you have it all over Twitter, Facebook, I'm assuming, but the best one to do is to go directly to the website here, where you can become a member. You can also donate to this cause, because, like I said before, if this is an issue for you, maybe you're not a firearms owner, but this is the forefront of property rights in Canada. I know we have other measures that are happening again here in British Columbia. You and I are both in British Columbia, and the government here is also trying to push for unexplained wealth measures. I don't know if you know anything about that, but this is another a quiver in their bow to go after private property and say, you have some wealth, look at all the look at that nice boat you got, look at that nice car you got, explain to me why you have it, and then we'll flip the judicial system on its head. You prove to us how it's your property and not the other way around. So I want to thank you so much, Rod Giltaca. Is there any other last things you want to put in there?
Well, when it comes to these kinds of things, whether it's our, trying to preserve our legal ability to own and use firearms, or it's anything else, whether it's the climate emergency that might necessitate your car being taken, or you forced to do things that you can't afford or don't want to do, I think it's really important that people pay attention to what's going on. And it's long past the time where people can explain it away, like, oh, you're being alarmist. It's like, well, these things are actually happening, and it's affecting our lives now. So it's only going to get, I hate to say it, it's only going to get worse if people don't take at least some political action. So the key to preserving any rights, not just for you, but for the next generation, for our kids and their kids, is you got to get involved. And these liberals and the NDP that are enabling them, hand in glove the whole way, they got to go. And that means that everyone has to get out and vote and talk to your MPs and don't vote for people that are wrecking your life. So anyway, be active.
And like you said, as soon as the Conservatives do get in, it's our job to keep their feet to the fire and make sure they keep their promises. Thank you, Rod Giltaca, once again for joining me today.
Thank you.